Welcome back to Steeped in Cinema, a Real Reflections podcast based on my author Substack account where I take deep dives. I write essays that take deep dives into films and how they reflect on our culture. And we'll be doing this on the podcast here, one cup of tea at a time. I'm Brett Voyna, your host, and today we're going to be braving the cold. It's been so cold lately that, I kind of felt like that would be a good topic for an episode where we're going to be exploring cinematic Winterlands. These are films that either feature the cold or embrace the cold or have winter or cold somehow incorporated into the film. But before we get too lost in the snow, as it were, I have got our tea for today. We are going to be steeping a steaming cup of peppermint tea. So let me tell you exactly, obviously this is the perfect pairing for our topic today. It's crisp, it's a cooling tea, that is very reminiscent of the winter, but it's also invigorating. It wakes you up, much like the movies that we're going to be talking about. This particular blend of tea, we get all of our tea, or at least I try to. Some of it I have to get from Amazon just because of the availability of it, but 9 times out of 10 we get our tea from the Ohio Tea Company in our local area here. They've got loose leaf teas and a lot of cool and interesting custom blends. And the particular type of tea that we are going to be sipping on today is one from Ohio Tea Company known as the Casablanca. So not only is it fitting as it is a peppermint tea, it's a black Earl Grey and a green tea with peppermint and bergamot. So the actual ingredients are, it says here, it's gunpowder green tea, peppermint leaves, black tea, and bergamot. Well, that's the official ingredients list. But it's movie titled Casablanca. It's a cool, relaxing, sort of crisp peppermint tea. It's very light. It's refreshing, but cold at the same time, much like the films and topics that we are going to be discussing today. So, my friends, I invite you to grab your tea or coffee or whatever is going to keep you warm through our chilling discussion. And let's jump into it, my friends. The topic for today's episode is cinematic winter landscapes or winterscapes, if you will. And what I'd like to talk, we're going to be talking about a few specific films. Mostly we're going to be touching on The Revenant, Fargo, and The Thing, as well as one that may not be as well known. There's a film called The Edge that I would also probably going to be mentioning in this little discussion as well. But what I'd like to talk about first, guys, is the visual language of winter films and how just the visual representation of it by itself is empowering. So let's start with the obvious. As I said, the snow obviously is going to be the most prominent image when it comes to winter landscapes. And there's something about a snow-covered, as I said, landscape or scenery that makes a film feel very immersive and raw. It strips everything down. As I say, it leaves just the raw elements. There's no distractions, there's no excess, there's no flashiness. It's just the picture and the story, and it connects you to it in a way that I think is really personal. It's and a lot of times it's characters. It gives you the feeling of characters against the world in an unforgiving world too. So as I mentioned, we're going to be talking about some films. Let's take a look at The Revenant, for example. This is a film that is steeped in coldness and bitterness and rawness. The camera lingers on these frozen rivers. You've got the breath in the air. It's brutal. I mean, you are freezing while you watch this movie. Also feel like the temperatures in Titanic. You know in the Titanic when the water floods in and you feel that coldness. That is exactly what's happening in this one. It's a very brutal, cold, raw film, and you are not just watching Leo DiCaprio as Hugh Glass suffer in this film. Like you are feeling it. His body is shaking, and everything about it is just steeped in coldness. You feel it, like you feel it in your actual body. The environment itself is not just a setting. It's more like I don't know, like a silent antagonist, like a character in and of itself. It's sort of like another thing that has to be conquered. It's not just surviving this bear attack or surviving these people or surviving the situation. It's also surviving this element that's painted in this cold, white landscape. Now, you also have another film, as I mentioned, like The Edge with Anthony Hopkins and Alec Baldwin. This is another film. This is about surviving in the wilderness as well. And it also has a very cold, rustic look, winter white. The thing that really stood out to me in this film was the fact that, in addition to the surrounding landscapes, but these guys looked dirty and gritty. Chapped, raw lips, skin is cracked, cuts and bruises. I mean, you feel it. The fact that it takes place in the winter adds that level of just hopelessness, and like I said, you can feel it while you're watching the film. If this were to take place in the summer, you would not feel as helpless or as desperate as it does in a winter setting. And then you compare that to films like Fargo, where the Coen brothers are using winter in a completely different situation. The snow here itself isn't necessarily dangerous snow. Like, it's not something that they have to survive. It's just part of the season, But it has an emotional sense to it. It also feels isolating to the characters. This landscape is wide open in this movie. It's endless. It's flat. But somehow, because of the snow, it feels limited and trapping in a way. The snow is acting like a blank canvas, which makes every single crime in this film and every bad decision and everything that goes wrong, it's acting like it makes it so it stands out even more. Because, when you really break Fargo down, yes, there's a murder involved, and yes, there's some craziness that ensues, but really it's a very simplistic story about some, weird car salesman dude that just makes some bad choices. But when it's told on this white blank surface, everything is really noticeable and stand out because you're not distracted by anything else. All your attention is on these little stories, this little character, and it makes him bigger than life that way. The blood in the snow. Then in the finale with the wood chipper, every muffled sound, everything is just heightened because of the starkness of the environment. Again, if this same story were to be told in a summer or a spring setting, it might not hit the same way. You might not pay as much attention to it, and you might not really have as big of an impact. And then we've got movies like The Thing. Now, here, the snow doesn't just play as an isolating element or, in that fact, this is a suffocating element. The snow is not isolating, it is oppressing you, it is trapping completely. It makes the paranoia in the film even more intense. There's nowhere to run, there's nowhere to hide. You're just stuck in this situation that is crazy. And not only are these people, fighting some weird creature, but now they can't even trust each other and they've got nowhere to go. And the characters begin to realize that, and so the cold now, it feels like a monster in and of itself. So that is, to me, it's just interesting how a simple landscape or a simple visual can really change or heighten or enhance the film and the viewing experience of specific films. And I think that in these specific films, if you were to even change just that one small detail, you have a completely different film, a completely different feeling, and a completely different situation. And, kind of like our peppermint Casablanca tea. It's very chilling. It's refreshing. It's cool. It's crisp. But if you were to take out just that one small peppermint element, that one small cool detail, you wouldn't have anything special per se. This would just become a regular Earl Grey black tea. It's that one little detail that makes it cool and refreshing and gives you a whole new way of appreciating and experiencing something very familiar. So guys, one of the things I like to do in my essays on the Real Reflections Substack account is I like to compare what are our films and what our stories and what these things say about us as a society. Being from theater, I've grown up with the belief that theater mirrors society, and I also believe that film does as well. Film or stories in general, doesn't matter what the media, it could be a book, it could be whatever. Stories say a lot about society. So I like to dig go a little deeper, dig into these films and feel out what these cold, wintry films are saying about us. So let's take a look at The Revenant. Winter in this film is representing basically survival in its purest form. Revenant and The Edge, they're both very similar films in that fact that they are representing survival. It's about resilience, endurance, and what happens when we're stripped away of our little modern comforts. You take away our blankets and our cell phones and our grocery stores, and we become entirely different people. And there's a lot of stories, actually, and a lot of themes and movies that touch on this very topic. I think that speaks to something, I think that says a lot about us, doesn't it? I mean, the idea that when we are faced with something overwhelming, whether it's something like in The Revenant or The Edge, where you're in a survival in its literal sense, you're trapped in the wilderness, surviving against the elements and hoping you can make it out of it, whether it's that or real life hardships or some sort of a personal struggle, paying bills, getting a job, anything like that, whatever it's speaking to, it forces us to find out who we really are. The Revenant is a brutal film, yeah, but strip all that brutalness away, and at its core, this is a film about determination, that human spark about never giving up, never backing down. And a lot of us have done that. And again, it doesn't necessarily mean that you've been trapped in the wilderness and have found your way back to civilization, but it could just mean that you have survived through a horrible time or a difficult situation, or even if it's just something like, man, I gotta find a place to live, get a car. All those things can be very stressful, and it's just about determining, or going back to school, whatever it can be. That's what's being represented here, is just that determination, that resilience, that never giving up. And winter is that in its literal purest form. And then in Fargo, we've got winter representing something else entirely. This isn't a survival struggle. This is about morality, moral coldness, emotional detachment, if you were. The crimes that are taking place in this film? The crimes that are taking place. What happened? I'm not sure what happened. I turned southern all of a sudden. It's really early in the morning, and let me chill up in my throat here with some of this peppermint tea from Ohio Tea Company, our Casablanca beverage. Okay. What was I saying? Okay. So the crimes that are taking place in this film, even though, again, everyday things that maybe not everyday things, but they're not overly insane, theatrical, dramatic crimes, but they feel that way. They feel extra ruthless. They feel extra large, extra sinister, because they contrast so heavily with the environment. Because in the background, there's not anything going on. It's a blank, pale slate, and the directors and the storytellers just throw this story, and you're forced to look at it because there's nothing else to look at. Everything in the background is calm, it's peaceful, it's quiet. But in your face, you're looking at greed, selfishness, and desperation, and you're forced to stare at it and see it completely. Even though it's simple, it's all you're seeing. It's the perfect example of how winter, as I said, symbolizes emotional detachment. And this may be why so many people, myself included, suffer from seasonal depression. Because, you look outside, it's not necessarily so much a connection to holidays. I mean, yes, holidays can play into that type of an emotion, but I think that a lot of it has to do with just, you look outside and it's just, everything is dead, and so you're constantly reminded of your own mortality, and it's white, and it's blank, and it's gray, and it's just, it just projects so much emotional detachment that I feel that that's why that happens. We just feel so blah and grim during that time. And I think that that's why it works so well in films like Fargo, is because it's so background and so white and so grim that you don't want to see it. So you're forced to just stare at whatever else is in front of you, no matter how easy and simplistic it very well may be. And then The Thing. So here's a completely different reflection. This is the paranoia in its purest form. Again, winter is giving us the purest form of everything. And this isn't so much about emotional detachment and sadness and survival. I mean, yes, there is survival, but this is about paranoia and fear. When this movie came out, we're talking the 80s, Cold War was still fresh and big deal. And the idea that the enemy could be among us, and that trust itself could be dangerous, and that trusting someone could very well end you dead. That is what this movie is tapping into. Even today, we live in a world where misinformation is spreading faster than anything, and paranoia and this mistrust is still very real and still very prominent. And I think that The Thing takes that fear and amplifies it, using the freezing landscape to make the characters feel even more isolated and make everything feel even more intense. Because what else would that cold do? Because that's what cold does. Everything is more ridiculous in the cold. I mean, just think about it. Even something as simple as like, man, I want to go outside and clean out my car, for example. If we're not fortunate enough to have an indoor garage and you have to park outside, like myself, you got to go outside and clean out your car. And even that just becomes like you got to put the gloves on and your hands get cold and your hat and your face, and you're just cleaning out the car. But all of this, and you hate doing it, so you do it real fast, and then the cars don't get cleaned as well. And then you don't even bother washing it because, again, it's all cold. You don't want to be out. Cold really makes us agitated. It makes us nervous. It makes us uncomfortable in a way that no other temperature can. And to be honest, I prefer cold a little more so than extreme heat, if we're talking extremes. But lately, I'm just kind of over it. And honestly, this peppermint tea is the only kind of cold this is really good. The thing about this that I really enjoy is that even though it's a cold, crisp tea, it ends nice and warm. So it's going to go down, it's going to refresh you, it's going to invigorate you, it's going to bring you to life, and then it's going to warm you up on the inside and not leave you as freezing and as rigid as some of these movies, like The Thing, can do. Because, The Thing ends rather bleak and unsatisfied. I'm so sorry. I love The Thing. It's actually one of my favorite films, horror-wise. I love this movie. All right, friends, now it's time for a new little midway segment, you could call. I absolutely love trivia, specifically movie trivia, and I love trivia podcasts, so I kind of wanted to add a little fun trivia section to our tea and movie discussions here. So while we're discussing films like Fargo, The Thing, Revenant, and The Edge, I want to throw out some trivia, and if we have any more guests, like if Megan comes and does another episode, or anybody else who does an episode, I might throw these trivia questions at them. But since it's just me today, I'm just going to read off these trivia questions. We're going to give a beat, and then I'll reveal the answers. So feel free to play along if you're listening. You can comment answers or whatever you want to do. Just have some fun, and we'll learn a little fun movie fact about some of the films that we're talking about today with our new little trivia segment, and then we'll get back into some more discussion before we wrap up today, guys. So let's start our first round of Steeped in Cinema trivia. We're going to do 5 trivia questions here based on the movies that we've been talking about in this podcast episode. Question number 1. In The Revenant, starring Leonardo DiCaprio, his performance earned him his very first Oscar. What was his first Oscar-nominated movie? Question number 2. The Thing was based on a novella. Do you know the title of the original story? Bonus points if you can name the author. So this question, we're looking for the title of the original novella that The Thing was based on, and bonus points if you know the answer. Question number 3. In Fargo, Marge Gunderson is famous for her warm but quirky personality. What animal appears on her hat during the film? Question number 4. In The Thing, what type of blood test is used to identify the alien in the crew? So, again, just to clarify, what I'm looking for here is that in the movie The Thing, in order to identify who the creature was, they perform a blood test. Basically, just what was the blood test? You know, what did they do? And finally, question number 5. The Revenant is loosely based on a true story, as loosely as most Hollywood films. Revenant's loosely based on a true story. What real-life frontiersman is Leonardo DiCaprio's character inspired by? I believe I gave the name earlier in our discussion, so if you were paying attention, you'll know. All right, guys, so there are your questions. Let's go through now and reveal our answers. Let's head back to question number 1. In The Revenant, Leonardo DiCaprio's performance earned him his first Oscar. What was his first Oscar-nominated movie? Answer: What's Eating Gilbert Grape from 1993 was Leonardo DiCaprio's other Oscar nomination. So if you guessed What's Eating Gilbert Grape, you are correct. It was not Titanic. All right, question number 2. The Thing was based on a novella. Do you know the name of the original story? And bonus points if you could get the name of the author. The name of the novella was Who Goes There? And it was written by John W. Campbell Jr. So if you were able to catch that title, Who Goes There, and if you got the author, congratulations, John W. Campbell Jr. So you get some extra bragging rights. You can tell all your friends, hey, I know horror so well, I know the title and the author of The Thing. And if you didn't get it right, you know it now, so you can still impress your friends. Question 3. In Fargo, Marge Gunderson is famous for her warm but quirky personality. What animal appears on her hat during the film? And the answer would be it is a mallard. That is right. She is wearing a mallard. It just adds to her to the quirkiness and the oddity of the character. She is one of my favorite characters of all time, Marge Gunderson. She's just this sort of aloof police officer that you don't think is ever going to solve any crime ever in her life, and she manages to put this whole thing together. It's brilliant, and she is a great character, and I love her. If you haven't seen Fargo, the movie, I have not actually watched the series, but I love the movie. If you haven't seen the movie, you should watch it. Okay, question 4. In The Thing, what type of blood test was used to identify the creature among the crew? The answer was the test used a heated wire to detect reactions in blood samples. So they had these Petri dishes, and they put the blood samples of each person in it, and then they heated up a coil wire and stuck the heated wire into the blood, assuming that if this was the creature's blood, that it would react violently. And spoiler alert, it does. And it's a very scary and tense moment, and it's probably the scariest moment in the entire film, next to the noise the creature makes. Finally, question number 5. In The Revenant, it is loosely based on a true story. Which real-life frontiersman is Leonardo DiCaprio's character inspired by? And the answer is, of course, as I mentioned earlier, Hugh Glass is the character that Leo DiCaprio plays in The Revenant. Guys, this was really fun. I hope you had some fun playing trivia. Hope you learned a little bit of something. And like I said, next time if we have any guests, we will definitely throw some trivia at them and see how they do. So yeah, how'd you do? Let us know in the comments. Now we're going to take a little sip of our peppermint tea, cool and calm our throat, and then we'll move on to our next part of the discussion. I'm loving this tea. Casablanca. All right, friends. So moving on to the final part of our discussion here on this episode. I always like to, as in my articles and essays, like to talk about a perspective, that may not be talked about a lot or as often, just to give a fresh sort of conversation, something to bring to the table that's different and unique. And in this particular topic and for this circumstance, I want to talk about how, and I did mention it earlier in our discussion, how winter itself as a season in these particular films is not just a landscape or a scenery, but it's kind of like a character in and of itself, and usually treated as an antagonist, something to endure, something to be survived, something to overcome. But I'd like to take a flip on that same coin and talk about that winter can also be viewed as liberating, as not necessarily a bad thing, and it has its purpose. Much like the emotion of sadness. A lot of sadness gets a bad rap for being a bad emotion. Nobody wants to feel sadness. They don't want to feel sad. But you know what, guys? Sadness and just like winter, it is a natural part of the experience, and it's there to help us appreciate the other parts. Much like death in and of itself is here to help us to appreciate life. Sadness helps us to appreciate happiness, much like it teaches us in the film Inside Out. And winter, although most of the time, yes, is harsh, and yes, needs to be survived, and yes, has to be overcome, but it also does have some liberating and refreshing values that I want to talk about for you. So let's think about films like in The Revenant. Again, yes, winter is brutal. He has to survive. But it's also the only thing that's keeping Hugh Glass from being hunted down too quickly. The cold is isolating him, yes, but that isolation and that separation is also giving him the fighting chance that he needs to overcome this situation. Now, in The Thing, something very similar. Yes, the snow is trapping them in this situation to where they cannot escape, but the snow is also trapping the creature. The snow is also keeping the creature contained away from the rest of the world. If they weren't in the middle of this nowhere, frozen in this vast wasteland of ice, this thing could spread and take over the world. And so the very thing that is making them vulnerable is also what is protecting the rest of humanity. So yes, the story centered around our characters, that ones that we're identifying with and the ones that we're relating to. They are in a hardship and they are trapped and they're not going to probably make it out of this situation. And the cold is preventing them from doing that easily. That's right. That's right, Groot. It's crazy. But it's also having the same effect on the monster. It's also preventing that creature from as easily taking over the situation and spreading to the rest of humanity. Then in Fargo, we have a little bit of something different that happens with this coldness. It acts more like a balance. The cold is quiet, yes. It may be harsh. Still, it's snowy and it's freezing and it's cold and you want to put your coat on and you want to get warmed up when you watch it. But this coldness is also highlighting the warmth of our favorite character, Marge Gunderson. She is the contrast to all of that moral coldness, and the winter is making her warmth stand out even more. Again, picture this in a summer setting, which would be beautiful, especially in where this story takes place. Her character is not going to seem as interesting because she's melting in with all of the rest of the warmth. It's because of that cold, plain, drab, bleak background that her nice, pleasant friendliness is standing out and makes us feel good whenever she is on the screen. When we see the other characters, we feel that cold, that grit, that emotional detachment, that moral discomfort. But when Marge comes in, we feel, oh, here's that blanket. Here's that cup of warm tea that warms us to the core. In fact, I'm going to take a sip of our peppermint tea that, although cooling, will warm me to the core. So the winter makes her warmth stand out even more. And it's just interesting to me how something that seems so hostile in these films, the survival elements of The Revenant and in The Edge where we're fighting against the elements, or The Thing where the snow and the ice itself is sort of like a barrier, or in Fargo where it's more of a blank statement, that cold and snowy environment can also be the very thing that defines the story's outcome. Winter is not just an obstacle, it's a test, it's a boundary, as I mentioned, and sometimes it can be a strange kind of protector. And I think that says a lot about perspective, that sometimes we need to have different views and we need to take a different view on topics and on situations, because even though we might see things in one light, if we take a moment to look at it from a different perspective, we might see that it's not necessarily as bad, or it might not always be as evil as it makes itself out to be. And just like suffering with winter and winter times and seasonal depression, maybe there's another side to the coin. So, what is it about winter in films that makes it so powerful? Is it because winter is honest? It doesn't care about you. It doesn't pick sides. It just simply is. It just simply exists. And that forces people, both in films and in real life, the audience, to figure out who they really are when the comforts of the world are gone. When you don't have the grocery store and you don't have a comfy, cozy bed, what will you do? Winter in cinema isn't just about snow or Christmas. It's about survival. It's about morality, paranoia, fear, and transformation, and sometimes protection. It's a mirror that reflects the best and the worst of us. And honestly, all this talk about icy landscapes and paranoia and fear and depression just makes me glad that I have this delicious cup of Casablanca tea, which is peppermint, to reminder that not all kinds of colds are bad, and that even sometimes something that can be cold on the surface has the ability to warm us deep down on the inside. Well, guys, that is it for today's episode of Steeped in Cinema. Let me know what your favorite wintertime set film is. Which ones make you feel the cold the most? And I want to thank you again for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed it so much, don't forget to subscribe to Steeped in Cinema wherever you listen to podcasts. Leave a comment and tell me, what kind of tea should I pair with our next deep dive into cinema? And have you ever had peppermint tea? And what type of beverage do you generally partake in when you are listening to our little show here? Thanks again so much for listening, my friends. And until next time, be sure to keep steeping your mind in great cinema. Cheers.